Welcome to this video on the history of the Kuei-jin, the primary supernaturals of the White Wolf supplemental setting, Kindred of the East. To understand the history of the Kuei-jin, one must begin with the Kuei-jin's understanding of time and the cosmos. For the Kuei-jin, time is not linear. It has no fixed start or end. There is no relentless march to finality, either of eternal paradise or damnation. Even life and death are just lands through which the wandering soul passes in its endless journey. All things are bound to the great cycle of being, the wheel of ages. Life is born, life dies, empires rise and fall, fortunes are built and famines are suffered, all in accordance with its relentless turning. Kuei-jin scholars mark the great cycle in 12 epochs. The first age was a time before time, the age of oneness and perfect harmony. That one perfection was named the august personage of Jade, the Emperor of Heaven, in which all things dwelt. The second age is called the Age of Beauty, when the one became two, Yin and Yang, the Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress. The Ebon Dragon embodied the receptive, contemplative, passive force of Yin. The Scarlet Empress personified the active, frantic, creative force of Yang. Through their existence and interaction came the creation of Qi. From Qi came all things, matter and spirit. The Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress gave birth to the 10,000 things. The mightiest of these were gods and dragons, which, as they came into being, were mandated by heaven to perform certain duties and given certain offices in the courts of the spirits. Thus was born the celestial bureaucracy. But some creatures escaped the notice of the Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress. They were not taught and given no responsibilities under heaven, so they ran wild and greedily devoured Qi wherever they could. These rogue creations became demons and monsters of legend. They glutted themselves on the Qi of entire areas and claimed dominion over these polluted lands. They rejected the authority of the august personage of Jade and waged war on each other and the gods. Eventually, the mightiest and most treacherous of these demons became lords over their own kind, the Yama Kings. To combat the Yama Kings, the Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress gave birth to the Shin. Now Shin can be translated in several ways: gods, spirits, divinity, supernatural, or superhuman. It is a blanket term for the supernatural creatures of the Middle Kingdom and includes the Hange Yokai, the shapeshifters, the elemental Kamui, and the animal spirits of the Hirayanu, along with a host of other creatures. The Shin were given duties to ensure that the great cycle would continue as intended. In the Second Age, humans were born as the ultimate expression of the love between the Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress, a perfect balance of yin and yang. The advent of man enraged the Yama Kings, who had been created and then forgotten. They attacked the first mortals with plague, terror, and destruction. The august personage of Jade, incensed by the Yama King's temerity, selected some of the most excellent of early mortals, the wisest and strongest, and bestowed his favor upon them. These mortals were changed. They gained the ability to exist freely in the mortal world and the spirit world. They could imbibe Qi from the natural wellsprings of the earth as the dragons could, and perform feats to rival even the gods. The creation of these heroes marked the beginning of the Third Age. These heroes were named the Wanjian, the 10,000 immortals. The Third Age was the Age of Legends, the time of the Wanjian, who ruled the Middle Kingdoms as immortal emperors and demon slayers. The gods themselves walked among humanity and guided its progress. The Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress instructed the Wanjian to purge the Middle Kingdom of the Yama Kings and to provide correction to rogue spirits and mortals. Despite being immortal, the most powerful Wanjian would, in time, become divine in their own right, and join the spirit courts as gods. The Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress would then select new mortals to exalt to those empty positions. The Yama Kings had been defeated in open battle, but they learned subtlety in the Third Age, and in time, they tempted the Wanjian with forbidden knowledge. The gods had taught the Wanjian how to harvest Qi from the dragon founts of the earth, where the Qi flowed through the earth and intersected, clean and pure and replenishing. But the Yama Kings whispered to the Wanjian that Qi could be taken from the 10,000 things, from flesh, blood, and even breath. At first, the Wanjian would only feast on the chi of demons, monsters, or other enemies. Of course, the more they fed in this way, the more they hungered, and the more they hungered, the easier it became to justify deviating from the will of heaven. The fourth age was called the Age of Beautiful Sadness, as the Wanjian descended into madness. The immortal demon-slaying heroes of old became gluttonous warlords, rampaging across the Middle Kingdom, seeking blood and jade to feed their bottomless appetites for chi. The Wanjian warred with the Shin, and even set the Shin to war against one another. The spirits grew fearful of the rapacious hunger of the Wanjian and sealed their courts against them. The sages and dragons tried to reason with the Wanjian, but to no avail. They had been blinded by their own carnality and deafened by their greed. The voices of spirits and man cried out to heaven for salvation from their one-time protectors. The august personage of Jade heard the cries of the Wanjian's victims and delivered judgment on them in a single stroke. The most sacred palace of the Wanjian, Mount Meru in what is today Tibet, was destroyed. As for the Wanjian themselves, they found themselves turned into the hungry dead, their lives and their precious chi torn from their very bodies. Now they could only sustain themselves by stealing chi from others. The august personage, in his anger, turned his face away from the Middle Kingdom and the spirits, leaving them to their own devices. The Ebon Dragon and the Scarlet Empress, ashamed of their children, also turned away, but before leaving, hid the secrets to redemption behind in the world, so that the Wanjian might find redemption one day. The border between the mortal and the spirit worlds became thick and difficult to pass through, save in certain places of power. In the ultimate show of irony, the souls of the Wanjian could only enter the world by escaping from the realms of the Yama kings, and only those with sufficiently strong Po souls had the savagery to make such a journey. Thus, the ranks of the greatest heroes could only be filled by the worst of sinners, and those who died in suffering and anger. Mortal and Shin alike cursed the Wanjian as a plague, and renamed them the Wan Kuei, the 10,000 demons. Meanwhile, the Yama kings snuck back into the Middle Kingdom, as their greatest enemies had just been brought low. The surviving Wan Kuei scattered throughout the Middle Kingdom in a period of the Fourth Age known as the Great Wandering. They divided the Middle Kingdom into 5 great courts, each with its own immortal ruler. The court of the Black Tortoise in the north, in what is today Manchuria, the court of the Scarlet Phoenix in the south near Cambodia, the court of the White Tiger in the west in Tibet, the court of the Azure Dragon in the east comprising Korea and Japan, and the court of the Yellow Emperor in the center, composing the peoples of the Yellow River. These exiles of heaven brooded in their corners of the Middle Kingdom, rarely speaking to one another, and occasionally meeting in titanic battles for fertile land and valuable jade. During one such battle between the Yellow Emperor Court and the Scarlet Phoenix Court, the sorcerers of the Scarlet Phoenix cast a powerful ritual producing 10 suns in the sky. These extra suns burned their enemies, but also dried the Yellow River and killed the crops of the mortal settlements. The people begged a powerful warrior sorcerer named Yi to save them from the feuding Wan Kuei. Yi enchanted 9 arrows and climbed to the top of a mountain. He fired the arrows at once into the 9 suns, not only breaking the spell, but sent it rebounding back towards the Wan Kuei as a powerful curse. Now, when a Wan Kuei is exposed to the sun, they will rot and fall to pieces. But one of the Wan Kuei who had fallen in the Fourth Age eschewed the great games of court and undertook a journey of 1,000 years in search of redemption. This Kuei discovered the clues left behind by the Ebon Dragon and Scarlet Empress in each of the 5 directions, north, south, east, west, and center, as well as in the 5 elements, air, earth, water, fire, and wood. Subsequent Wan Kuei would name him Shu, the Grand Arhat, teacher of the Great Principle and master of the 5-fold Way. Shu was the first Bodhisattva, enlightened one, of the Wan Kuei. Now, Shu had only 2 disciples. The first disciple was a creature from the west, beyond the deserts of Xinjiang. He, like the Wan Kuei, was cursed, a creature of darkness, but desired to transcend it and return to heaven's favor. This disciple, named Zhao Lat, studied under Shu for a time, and gained the sight of a dragon. But Zhao Lat could not master his Po soul, and was banished back to the west. Shu then took another disciple, this one named Qi. Qi recorded Shu's teachings in the foundational text of the Fivefold Way, the Qi Chuan, or the Commentaries of Qi. The court of the Yellow Emperor was active during the Shang Dynasty, the earliest mortal rulers of the Yellow River Valley. The Yellow Emperor court encouraged human sacrifice and blood cults among their followers, exploited the people shamelessly for their qi, and passed themselves as the people's honorable but eternally hungry ancestors. Though the august personage of Jade had turned his face from the Middle Kingdom, he would not suffer the Wan Kuei to flout his judgment. Not only were the Shang overthrown by the Zhou dynasty, but the Shi, descendants of Archer Yi and his disciples, attacked the Wan Kuei and drove them from their temples and palaces, wielding fire, swords, and qi magic developed over decades of harsh training. As the Yellow Emperor Wan Kuei were driven into the hills and countryside, Qi returned to them, bearing the great principle of Shu and the Fivefold Way. The Wan Kuei, now suitably chastened from their defeat, adopted Shu's teachings. Afterwards, mortal philosophers rose to prominence, such as Confucius and Lao Tzu, whose teachings the Wan Kuei also adopted as part of the Fivefold Way. Meanwhile, in Japan, like the rest of the Middle Kingdom, had its own Wanxian, and subsequently Wan Kuei. These Japanese immortals were called the Sennin, and after their fall from heaven's favor, the Gaki. The Japanese Gaki arranged themselves into proto-clans called Uji, the most powerful of which was House Bishamon. To the Jomon and Yayoi people of prehistoric Japan, the Bishamon were fierce, godlike protectors against the forces of the Yama kings and their servants, the Kumo goblin spiders. Around 700 BC, after the establishment of the Azure Dragon Court, the Wan Kuei secretly invaded Japan, riding across the Tsushima Strait on the backs of great water serpents. These serpent-born drove the Bishamon into hiding underground, leaving the serpent-born free to establish a power base among the mortal population. They adopted the local customs and rearranged themselves as House Genji. But the complete domination of the Genji was halted when Jimmu of the Yamato clan united Japan as its first emperor. Thanks to the instructions of shamans, possibly Japanese Shi, he had taken into his confidence, he was protected from the power and influence of the Genji, who consoled themselves by infiltrating lesser clans and biding their time. An opportunity came when the Fujiwara clan rose to prominence during the Heian period 300 years later. But whatever plans the Genji had were foiled when House Bishamon inexplicably chose that period to attack. Armed with powerful Qi sorcery, the Bishamon slaughtered the most dangerous and subtle members of House Genji. But when they had the Genji in full retreat, the Bishamon ceased their attack and actually offered their enemies peace. Since then, House Bishamon and House Genji have had an uneasy truce, occasionally broken by feuds between rival clans belonging to either house. In the 3rd century BC, Zheng, king of the state of Qin, conquered all of China and crowned himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Qin Shi Huang, in the interest of promoting unity within the empire, forbade all schools of thought except legalism and wuxing, and punished the ownership of forbidden books with death. The Shi took advantage of the Qin campaign to locate and burn some of the Wan Kuei's most valuable scrolls on history, spiritual discipline, and magic. The Wan Kuei once again fled to the Longmen Caves in Henan, where the Shi would not follow them. And off in Korea, heart of the Azure Dragon Court, the Wan Kuei, or Agma, attempted unsuccessfully to exert their control over Japan, even as the court divided into factions matching the 3 kingdoms of ancient Korea, Silla, Paikche, and Goryeo. In 668 AD, the Silla, with help from some Chinese mercenaries, conquered the other 2 kingdoms and created the unified Empire of Korea. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the Korean Agma waged war against the other Shin of the peninsula over their bounty of qi-rich jade. The war ended when the 3 Agma factions reunited with the appropriately named Agreement of Three and drove the Hangya Yokai beastmen from their sacred cairns. The Agma's newfound control over the precious jade supply gave rise to a new title for the Koreans, the Green Court. The Han Dynasty deposed the Qin after a mere 15 years, and in the 8 centuries that followed, the Yellow Emperor Court fractured into squabbling factions. By the 13th century, during the Song Dynasty, the Yellow Emperor court was caught off guard by an invasion from the north, the Mongols, who were being aided by the Kuei-jin of the Black Tortoise court. The Green courts adopted a posture of calculated neutrality and stood aside for the Mongols and the Black Tortoise, allowing them free access to China and Japan by sea. This did not endear the Green court to either the Yellow Emperor court or the Gaki. In 1274 AD, Kublai Khan sent a force of 30,000 men to Japan to subjugate the country. The mortal invasion was repelled, but the war between the Japanese, Chinese, and Korean Wan Kuei continued for years after the first invasion. In 1281, the Khan sent another army of 140,000 men. The Gaki knew that their country was about to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers of mortals. But while the Mongol fleet rested at anchor on the shore of Japan, a great typhoon rose and wiped out the invaders. Now, unlike other egomaniacal supernaturals, the Gaki claimed no credit for this event. The more pious Shintoist of House Bishamon claimed that Japan itself raised the divine wind, the kamikaze, in defense of itself. In 1304, the remnants of the Black Tortoise, White Tiger, and Yellow Emperor courts convened to discuss their disputes, along with the small matter of a band of Venetian merchants from some barbarian family called Giovanni. This meeting, known thereafter as the Council of Dragons, signed the Treaty of the Kinkunks. It abolished the three courts and rearranged them as the 5 august courts to be ruled by local ancestors: the Blood Court of Beijing, the Flesh Court of Shanghai, the Flame Court of Hong Kong, the Bone Court of Chongqing, and the Jade Court of Chang'an. They swore to act as the ultimate authority for the Kuei-jin in China, and declared war on the other two courts of the south and east. The dominion of the Kinkunks lasted for much of the Ming dynasty, even as the number of Chi-mei, or hungry vampires, and Akuma, servants of the Yama kings, seemed to grow exponentially. The fragile unity of the Kinkunks was shattered when the ancestor of the Jade Court was exposed as an Akuma in service to the Yama queen, Taomu. The other 4 courts, along with mercenaries from the Green Court and 2 Tiger Hanga yokai, destroyed many of the Wan Kuei of Chang'an. The seat of the Jade Court was moved to the Shaolin Monastery, as the Wan Kuei Bodhisattvas recorded this incident as the beginning of the 5th Age, the Age of Darkness. With the Wan Kuei of the Kinkunks suspicious of one another, they had no attention to pay to the health of the Chinese Empire, as the Ming dynasty gave way to the Qing dynasty, who slowly bartered off power to the Europeans. By the time the Wan Kuei realized the threat that the Europeans posed, the king had ceded Hong Kong, the very seat of the Flame Court, to Britain, and exempted foreigners from Chinese law. Off in Japan, in 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy arrived in Edo Bay with 4 warships and orders from President Millard Fillmore to open the nation of Japan to American trade, and if need be, to do so at gunpoint. The Gaki were as anxious at the arrival of the Americans as the mortal daimyo, and their concern at events in China, such as the Opium Wars, grew as the shogunate signed several unfavorable treaties with the Europeans. In a rare moment of unity, House Bishamon and House Genji agreed that the Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for over 200 years, had to be removed. But while the Bishamon wanted all foreigners and foreign influence expelled, the Genji saw the proverbial writing on the wall. If Japan did not modernize, it would be carved up and devoured just like China. The Gaki were instrumental in the push to modernize the military and economy of Japan, while the Bishamon stoked the flame of nationalist sentiment and denounced the Tokugawa as traitors and foreign lapdogs. The Boshin War and the resignation of Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu resulted in the Meiji Restoration. House Bishamon was not happy with the modernization of Japan, as numerous industrial projects disrupted or even destroyed the dragon nests from which they drew chi, but they accepted its fruits when Japan defeated Russia in 1905 and claimed Kwantung, Sakhalin, and Port Arthur. The Chinese Wan Kuei, seeing the Gaki's success in Japan, attempted to copy it by fomenting several anti-foreigner movements in China, and eventually rebellion against the Qing dynasty, the Xinhai Revolution. The revolution ended in the abdication of the last Chinese emperor, Puyi, in 1912, and the birth of the Republic of China under Sun Yat-sen, though the nation would later be unified under Chiang Kai-shek. In 1910, the Japanese were ready to flex their muscle, and with the help of House Genji, they annexed Korea. But the Gaki have long memories, and they felt owed for the Green Court's assistance to the Mongol invaders in the Black Tortoise Court. Many Korean Kuei found themselves impaled on jade-tipped spears and left to greet the Eye of the Sun. The King-kunks were infuriated when the Japanese Imperial Army invaded Manchuria in 1931, with the help of several House Genji warriors. Several young Wan Kuei traveled to the Jiangxi Soviet Republic to join the Chinese Communist Party. The King-kunks declared these communists to be Akuma, and despite the eventual success of the party in overthrowing Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, the communist Wan Kuei were eliminated. Relations only worsened between the Wan Kuei and the Gaki when Japan invaded Shanghai in 1937, the very seat of the Flesh Court, cutting it off from the aid of the rest of the King-kunks. Even after the end of the Second World War, the shadow war between House Genji and the Flesh Court continued to run hot and cold in the blood-soaked streets of Shanghai. The Kuei who allied with the Maoist cadres pleaded with the Bone Court for assistance, but were met with silence. On August 6, 1944, the Gaki of Japan reacted in horror as the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. The shockwave affected not only the physical world, but the spiritual world as well. Dragon nests were corrupted with irradiated chi, and the daylight dreams of the Gaki were filled with the laughter of the Yama kings. When the Japanese surrendered to the Americans, the Wan Kuei and Agma breathed a collective sigh of relief, as Japan was stripped of its territorial holdings. But the Agma made sure to purge Korea of any lingering Japanese Gaki who had the poor sense to, let's say, overstay their welcome in Korea. As the Wan Kuei contended with the realities of communist rule in China, the Gaki waited to see how the Americans intended to reshape Japan, and the Green Court adjusted to Korea being a divided nation between American and Soviet rule along the 38th parallel. In Southeast Asia, the isolationist and debauched Golden Courts, the remnant of the Court of the Scarlet Phoenix, suddenly became very active. The Scarlet Phoenix Court of the South had largely rejected the great principle in the fivefold way of Grand Arhat Shu, having been influenced by a mixture of animist, Buddhist, Hindu, and later even Muslim doctrines. The Kuei of the Scarlet Phoenix Court embraced several heretical dharmas. The only orthodox dharmas to find any purchase in the South were the howl of the devil tiger and the dance of the thrashing dragon, typically in their most brutal forms. The Scarlet Phoenix Court collapsed into rival courts in Wu as it was pressed by the hostile Northern Kuei, the Hange Yokai, and the servants of the Yama kings. Ironically, the Northern Kuei frequently accused the Scarlet Phoenix of harboring Akuma. Among the Golden Court's heterodox traditions so appalling to the Chinese Kuei was the absolute rule of the Penanggaling queens, the female Kuei who had mastered flesh Shintai and survived the secret rite needed to join their ranks. The territory of the Golden Courts extended from eastern India to the Polynesian islands. Their strongest courts were among the perpetually warring principalities of Indochina, and gave them many bloody battles to feast upon. The Dutch, Portuguese, British, French, and Japanese each came and departed in their turn. For the devils of the Golden Courts, these foreigners were nothing but blood and chi to be savored and later discarded. The Gaki came to Indochina with the Japanese army and found their barbaric cousins wielded strange arts and uttered blasphemy against heaven. The wars of Vietnam were a hell on earth for the Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian people. For the Kuei of the Golden Courts, it was a veritable cornucopia. Soldiers who disappeared were assumed to have been killed, or AWOL, and no one questioned if entire villages disappeared to sate the appetites of the Penanggaling queens and their followers. The Communist Party of Kampuchea and its paramilitary wing, the Khmer Rouge, in the name of creating an agrarian utopia, herded the Cambodian people out of the cities and put them to forced labor. 2 million died of starvation, bullets, exposure, and occasionally pickaxes to the skull. The Golden Courts, in turn, reaped a bloody harvest from the labor camps and prisons before Vietnam conquered the People's Republic of Kampuchea in 1979. In the intervening years, the courts of the Chinese King-kunks and the noble Uji of the Japanese Gaki achieved a somewhat tenuous détente. The Blood Court of Beijing began promoting the use of the term Kuei-jin, a mixture of the Chinese word and a Japanese suffix, to create a sense of unity between the two factions. However, this did nothing to stop the shadow war between the Flesh Court and House Genji. The Green Court continued in its neutrality, and the Golden Courts were not considered at all. As 1997 approached and the British 99-year lease on Hong Kong was about to expire, the Flame Court marshaled every last Kuei, Triad, and mercenary in anticipation of scouring the islands of any kindred who did not have the good sense to flee. But Hong Kong would only be the beginning. The Kuei-jin of the Blood Court, the Green Courts, and House Bishamon agreed to a plan to invade the territory of the kindred, starting with the cities of the western United States and Canada. This punitive expedition, planned for the year 2000, was called the Great Leap Outward. The Kuei-jin have fallen far from their origins as heaven's immortal warrior sages to nocturnal scavengers. They know what awaits them: the next age, the sixth age, the age of sorrows, when one of the Yama kings conquers his rivals and then unleashes hell on earth and reigns as a demon emperor. The Kuei-jin are uncertain as to how to meet the sixth age. Some believe that the Wheel of Ages can be turned back, that the reign of the demon emperor can be delayed or even prevented. Others say that if heaven has decreed the sixth age, who are they to stand against it? Were they not cast down from their place as the Wanjian for defying heaven in the first place? Some argue that they should withdraw from the world and ride out the sixth age as best they can. And a very quiet but growing minority of Kuei-jin have decided that it would be wiser to serve the Yama kings and eventually the demon emperor than to stand against him. After all, better to be at the right hand of the devil than in his path. This has been an overview of the history of the Kuei-jin, the kindred of the East. Thank you for listening. Until next time.